The blood on Katherine Foster's white lace gloves would not wash out, no matter how hard she scrubbed at the basin behind the mercantile, and she wondered if this was God's way of telling her she did not belong in Arizona territory. She had arrived in Mineral Park 3 weeks ago on the dusty stagecoach from Boston, carrying 2 trunks of impractical dresses and a heart full of idealistic notions about frontier life. Her brother had written such vivid letters about the opportunities out west, the freedom, the raw beauty of the desert landscape. What he had failed to mention was the violence, the hardship, and the fact that he would be dead from pneumonia before she even arrived. The blood on her gloves was not from violence, though. It was from a simple act of kindness that the townsfolk seemed to think proved their point about her unsuitability for this harsh land. A miner had been thrown from his horse that morning, his leg bent at an unnatural angle, and while everyone else stood around discussing what to do, Katherine had knelt in the dirt and tried to help. She had torn strips from her petticoat to bind the wound, had held the man's hand while someone rode for the doctor, had spoken softly to him about Boston and the ocean until his screams subsided into whimpers. Afterward, Mrs. Pemberton, the banker's wife, had looked at her with something between pity and contempt. "You are too soft for this life, dear. That tenderness of yours will get you hurt out here. People die. Animals die. You cannot mother every wounded creature you come across." Katherine had wanted to argue, but what could she say? She had cried herself to sleep every night since learning of her brother's death. She startled at the sound of gunshots, even when they were just cowboys celebrating payday. She could not even kill a chicken for supper without feeling nauseated. Mrs. Pemberton was probably right. Now, standing in the fading afternoon light of May 1883, Katherine wrung out the gloves and knew they were ruined. Like everything else she had brought from her old life, they simply were not suited to this new world. She hung them on the line anyway, watching them drip pink water into the dust. Those are never going to come clean. She turned to find a man leaning against the corner of the building, his hat pulled low against the sun. He was tall, lean in the way that men became when they spent their days working rather than sitting behind desks. His face was weathered, brown from the sun, but his eyes were kind. She judged him to be perhaps 25 or 26 years old, only a few years older than her own 22 years. "I am aware," Katherine said, trying to keep the trembling from her voice. But it seemed wasteful not to try. The man pushed off from the wall and walked closer. Now she could see the dust on his boots, the worn quality of his vest, the careful way he moved as though always conscious of the gun at his hip. "You are the one who helped Hank this morning." It was not a question, but Katherine nodded anyway. "That was kind of you." Doc Brennan said if you had not kept him calm and stopped some of the bleeding, he might not have made it. Anyone would have done the same, but they did not. The man tilted his hat back, and she could see his face more clearly now. Strong jaw, a small scar above his left eyebrow, eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. "I am Cole Vance. I run cattle about 10 miles north of here. Katherine Foster." She did not offer her hand as it was still damp from washing the gloves. "I know who you are. I was sorry to hear about your brother. Thomas was a good man. He helped me out when I first came to the territory, when I did not know a thing about mining or cattle or any of it." Katherine felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever someone mentioned Thomas. "Thank you. I wish I could have arrived in time to say goodbye." Cole nodded, and mercifully did not offer any of the empty platitudes she had heard from everyone else. Instead, he said, "Are you planning to stay in Mineral Park?" "I do not know. I have very little money, and my brother's claim turned out to be worth almost nothing. Mrs. Pemberton has offered me a position as a governess for her children, but..." She trailed off, not wanting to admit that the thought of spending every day under that woman's critical gaze made her want to board the next stage coach back east. But she thinks you are too soft for frontier life, Cole finished. Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. I suppose everyone in town has heard her assessment of my character. Probably. Cole smiled and it transformed his whole face. But I think she is wrong. You do. Softness is not weakness, Miss Foster. Sometimes it is the strongest thing a person can be. He gestured toward the gloves still dripping on the line. You ruined those helping someone. That takes a kind of courage that most people do not have. They would rather protect their nice things than risk them for another person. Katherine stared at him, surprised by the conviction in his voice. You really believe that? I do. My mother was the gentlest person I ever knew. She cried at everything, could not stand to see any creature suffer. But she was also the strongest. She kept our family together through drought and disease and my father's death. Her softness did not make her weak. It made her brave enough to keep caring when caring hurt. Katherine asked softly. She died 5 years ago, cholera. Cole looked away toward the mountains in the distance. I came west because I could not stay in that house without her. Everywhere I looked, I saw her absence. I understand that feeling. Katherine found herself taking a step closer to him. I thought coming here would help me feel connected to Thomas somehow, but instead, I just feel lost. They stood in silence for a moment, two people bound by grief and displacement. Then Cole cleared his throat and said, I came into town to ask if you might be interested in a different position than governess. What kind of position? I need help at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, is getting older, and the work is too much for her alone. I have about a dozen ranch hands, and keeping them fed and the house in order is a full day's work and then some. Mrs. Chen could use an assistant. The pay is not much, but room and board are included, and you would not have to answer to Mrs. Pemberton. Katherine considered this. You came all the way into town specifically to offer me employment. We have never met before. Cole had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Thomas talked about you a lot. He was so proud of you, of your education and your accomplishments. When I heard you were struggling to figure out what to do, I thought this might be a solution. But if it is too forward of me to suggest, I apologize. No, it is not too forward. It is kind. Katherine made a decision in that moment, one that felt both terrifying and right. I accept your offer, Mr. Vance. Cole, he said. If you are going to be working at my ranch, we should dispense with formalities. Then you must call me Katherine. He smiled again, and she felt something warm unfold in her chest, something that had been cold and tight since she received the telegram about Thomas. Can you be ready to leave tomorrow morning? I will come with a wagon. I can be ready. As Cole tipped his hat and walked away, Katherine looked down at her ruined gloves, still dripping onto the dusty ground. Maybe Mrs. Pemberton was right that she was too soft for this life. But maybe Cole was right too. Maybe that softness could be a kind of strength. She supposed she was about to find out. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of day that made Katherine understand why poets wrote about the West with such longing. The sky was impossibly blue, unmarred by the factory smoke that had always hazed the Boston skyline. The air smelled of sage and creosote, and something she could not quite name, but that made her think of possibility. Cole arrived promptly at 8 o'clock, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 draft horses. He helped her load her trunks, handling even the heaviest one with ease. Katherine noticed that he was careful with her belongings, not just tossing them into the wagon bed but placing them securely so they would not shift during the journey. Is this everything? He asked. Yes. I did not bring much from Boston, and I have acquired nothing here except a few supplies. She did not mention that she had sold most of her jewelry to pay for her brother's burial. The ride north took them out of Mineral Park and into country that seemed almost otherworldly in its stark beauty. Red rocks rose from the desert floor like ancient monuments. Saguaro cacti stood with their arms raised as if in perpetual surrender. In the distance, mountains shimmered in the heat. Cole pointed out landmarks as they traveled. That peak there is where the eagles nest. In another month you will be able to see the young ones learning to fly. And those cottonwoods mark where the creek runs. It is dry most of the year, but when the monsoons come in summer it fills up fast. You have to be careful not to get caught in a flash flood. "How long have you been ranching here?" Katherine asked. "About 4 years. I started with almost nothing, just a small herd I bought with money I had saved working as a cowboy for other outfits. Thomas helped me file the land claim and navigate all the legal matters. I owe him a lot. He never mentioned you in his letters." Cole glanced at her. "Did he write often?" "Every month, regular as clockwork. He told me about the mining, about the town, about the characters he met. But he never wrote much about his personal life, about his friends. Thomas was a private man. Good-hearted, always willing to help, but private." Cole paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I think he was lonely out here, if I am being honest. He talked about you all the time, about wanting to save up enough to bring you west or to go back east and visit. He missed you terribly." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. "I wish I had come sooner. You are here now. That is what matters." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the clip-clop of the horses' hooves. Katherine found herself relaxing in a way she had not since arriving in Arizona territory. There was something calming about Cole's presence, something steady and sure. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Of course. Why did you really offer me this position?" "You said Thomas talked about me, but there must be dozens of women in the territory who need work. Why me specifically?" Cole was quiet for so long that Katherine thought perhaps she had offended him. But then he said, "Because when I heard what you did for Hank, how you did not hesitate to help even though it meant ruining your clothes and getting blood on your hands, it reminded me of my mother. And because when Mrs. Pemberton said you were too soft for this life, it made me angry. People out here seem to think that hardness is the only way to survive, that you have to become as rough and unfeeling as the land itself. But that is not true. We need softness. We need people who still know how to be gentle." Katherine felt her throat tighten. "That is perhaps the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a very long time. It is just the truth." The Vance Ranch appeared on the horizon about an hour later, and Katherine felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. It was larger than she had expected, with a sprawling main house built of adobe and wood, several outbuildings and extensive corrals where horses and cattle milled about. She could see men working in the distance, their figures small against the vast landscape. As they drew closer, a woman emerged from the main house. She was small and neat, her dark hair pulled back in a bun, her face lined with age but her movements spry and efficient. She wore a simple cotton dress and an apron, and she smiled when she saw the wagon. "Mrs. Chen," Cole called as he pulled the horses to a stop. "I have brought you some help, as promised." Mrs. Chen came down the porch steps and looked up at Katherine with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You are the one who helped the injured miner, yes? The one the town ladies say is too delicate." Katherine climbed down from the wagon, grateful when Cole offered his hand to steady her. "I am Katherine Foster. HMPH. Town ladies know nothing. You have kind eyes. Kind eyes see things that need doing and do them. That is not delicate, that is strong, Mrs. Chen nodded as if this settled the matter. "Come. I will show you your room and then you can help me with the noon meal. These cowboys eat like horses." Cole caught Catherine's eye and smiled, and she found herself smiling back. Perhaps this would work out after all. The house was cool and surprisingly spacious inside, with thick adobe walls that kept out the worst of the heat. Mrs. Chen led Catherine down a hallway and opened a door to a small but comfortable room with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the desert. "This is yours, Mrs. Chen said. "The washroom is at the end of the hall. We have a good well, so water is not scarce like at some ranches. Mr. Cole is very particular about cleanliness. He says just because we live in the desert does not mean we must live like animals." "It is lovely," Catherine said honestly. The room was simple but clean, and after weeks of staying in the cramped boarding house in town, it felt like a palace. "Unpack later. Now we cook." Mrs. Chen was already heading back toward the kitchen, and Catherine hurried to follow. The kitchen was the heart of the house, a large room with a massive cast iron stove, a long wooden table, and shelves lined with supplies. The smell of baking bread filled the air, making Catherine's stomach rumble. She had barely eaten breakfast, too nervous about the journey. "You know how to cook?" Mrs. Chen asked, tying a fresh apron around Catherine's waist. "Yes, though probably not the kind of cooking you do here. Cooking is cooking. You feed people, you use what you have, you make it taste good. I will teach you what you do not know, Mrs. Chen pointed to a basket of potatoes. "Start peeling. The men will be in from the range at noon and they will be hungry." Catherine rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She had expected many things from frontier life, but she had not expected to feel so immediately at home in a ranch kitchen, peeling potatoes alongside a woman who spoke in short, practical sentences, and moved with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this work for decades. As they worked, Mrs. Chen talked. She had come to the territory from California with her husband 20 years ago. He had died in a mining accident, and she had supported herself ever since through cooking and housekeeping. She had worked for Cole for 3 years and spoke of him with obvious affection. "He is a good man," she said, stirring a pot of beans on the stove. "Fair with his workers, pays on time, does not drink himself stupid like some ranchers, but he is lonely. He works too hard, stays out on the range too long. He needs a wife, but he says he is too busy for courting." Catherine felt her cheeks warm and focused intently on the potato she was peeling. "Perhaps he has not met the right woman." "Perhaps," Mrs. Chen said, and there was something knowing in her tone that made Catherine's cheeks grow even warmer. At noon, the ranch hands came in for their meal. A rowdy group of about a dozen men ranging in age from a boy who could not have been more than 16 to a grizzled cowboy who looked old enough to be Catherine's grandfather. They were loud and boisterous, tracking in dust and smelling of horses and sweat, but they removed their hats when they saw Catherine and greeted her with surprising courtesy. Cole introduced her to each of them, and Catherine tried to remember all the names. There was Billy, the youngest, who blushed scarlet when she smiled at him. There was Joe, the foreman, a taciturn man with shrewd eyes who sized her up and seemed to find her acceptable. There was Manuel, who had worked with Cole since the beginning and told a joke in Spanish that made the other men laugh uproariously. They ate at the long table in the dining room, passing bowls of beans and potatoes and beef, sopping up gravy with thick slices of the bread Mrs. Chen had baked. The conversation flowed easily, the men talking about the day's work, about cattle that needed to be moved, about a fence that needed mending. Catherine mostly listened, fascinated by this glimpse into a world she had never known. After the meal, the men returned to work and Catherine helped Mrs. Chen clean up. The older woman showed her where everything went, how to manage the stove where the supplies were kept. It was all straightforward and practical, and Katherine found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it. "You did well, Mrs. Chen said as they finished washing the last of the dishes. "The men liked you. That is important. If the men do not like the cook, they complain and cause trouble, but they will not complain about you." "How can you tell?" Billy asked if there would be pie for supper. "He would not ask if he did not already trust you to make it good." Mrs. Chen smiled. "Men are simple that way." That evening, after the supper dishes were cleared and the kitchen was clean, Katherine sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the desert. The sky turned shades of orange and pink and purple that she had never seen in Boston, colors so vivid they seemed almost unreal. Cole came and sat beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one, and she accepted gratefully. "How was your first day?" he asked. "Exhausting and wonderful," Katherine said honestly. "I have never worked so hard in my life, but I have also never felt so useful." Mrs. Chen said you were a natural, high praise from her. They sipped their coffee in silence, watching as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Out here, away from city lights, they were breathtaking, thousands upon thousands of them scattered across the heavens like diamonds on velvet. "I think I could be happy here," Katherine said softly. Cole looked at her, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "I hope you will be." Over the following weeks, Katherine settled into life at the ranch with an ease that surprised her. She rose before dawn to help Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast for the hands, spent her mornings baking and cleaning, her afternoons mending clothes and preparing supper. The work was endless and often backbreaking, but she found satisfaction in it that she had never found in her old life. In Boston, she had been a teacher at a girls' school, instructing young ladies in literature and deportment. It had been respectable work, but it had always felt somehow empty, as though she were preparing her students for lives as ornamental as the china dolls they collected. Here, every task had immediate purpose. The bread she baked fed hungry men who needed fuel for hard work. The clothes she mended protected them from the elements. She was not preparing anyone for some theoretical future. She was sustaining life in the present. She also found herself watching Cole more than she probably should. The way he moved with such unconscious grace, comfortable in his body in a way that the Boston gentlemen she had known never were. The way he spoke to his men with respect, never pulling rank but somehow always maintaining their loyalty. The way his face softened when he looked at the cattle, or the horses, or the land itself. He was kind to her in small ways that made her heart flutter. He brought her wildflowers from the range, saying he thought she might like to have something pretty in her room. He made sure she had a good horse to ride when she expressed interest in learning, and patiently taught her the basics of horsemanship. He asked about her day, really listened to her answers, and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and observations. But he never crossed the line into anything that could be considered improper. He was always respectful, always careful to maintain appropriate distance. Katherine told herself this was good, that she should not be entertaining romantic thoughts about her employer. But late at night, lying in her small bed and listening to the coyotes howl in the distance, she could not help but wonder if he ever thought of her the way she thought of him. One afternoon in mid-June, about a month after her arrival, a rider came galloping up to the ranch house in a cloud of dust. Katherine was in the garden, trying to coax vegetables from the stubborn desert soil with Mrs. Chen's guidance, and she stood up in alarm at the urgent pace of the approaching horse. Cole came out of the barn at a run, and the rider, a young Mexican man Katherine did not recognize, started speaking rapidly in Spanish. Cole's face grew grave, and he turned to shout for Joe. The foreman appeared, and the three men conferred urgently. Katherine could not hear what they were saying, but she saw Cole glance toward the house, toward her, with an expression that made her stomach clench. He came over to the garden, his hat in his hands. "Katherine, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest about whether you can handle it." "What is it?" "There is a family about 5 miles west of here, the Rodriguez family. They have a small homestead, raise goats mostly. Their youngest child, a girl about 4 years old, has been badly burned. They sent for the doctor, but he is in Prescott dealing with a fever outbreak and will not be back for at least 2 days. They are asking if there is anyone who might help." Katherine felt her mouth go dry. "What kind of burn?" She pulled a pot of boiling water off the stove. "The messenger says it is bad, mostly on her arm and chest. I do not have any medical training. I know, but you are gentle and you are calm in a crisis. I saw how you were with Hank. The family is desperate, Katherine. I would not ask if there was anyone else, but Mrs. Chen's rheumatism is too bad for her to make the ride, and I do not trust any of the men with something this delicate." He paused. "But I will understand if you do not feel capable. This is not part of your job, and I have no right to ask." Katherine thought of the little girl, 4 years old and in terrible pain. She thought of Mrs. Pemberton's words about being too soft. She thought of Cole's words about softness being strength. "I will come," she said. "Tell me what supplies I should gather." Relief washed over Cole's face. "Thank you. Mrs. Chen will know what to pack. We need to leave immediately." 20 minutes later, Katherine was riding beside Cole toward the Rodriguez homestead, a bag of medical supplies strapped to her saddle. Mrs. Chen had packed clean bandages, a jar of honey, another of aloe willow bark for pain, and various other items, explaining rapidly how each should be used. The ride seemed to take forever, even though Cole kept the horses moving at a brisk pace. Katherine's mind raced with worry. What if she could not help? What if she made things worse? What if the child died while under her care? As if sensing her thoughts, Cole said, "You are doing a brave thing. Whatever happens, you are giving this family hope, and that matters." The Rodriguez homestead was small but tidy, a one-room adobe house with a lean-to for the goats. A woman stood in the doorway, her face streaked with tears, her hands twisting in her apron. 2 other children, a boy of about 7 and a girl of perhaps 9, huddled behind her. Cole spoke to the woman in Spanish, his tone gentle and reassuring. She responded rapidly, gesturing toward the house, and Katherine caught the word Maria several times. "The girl's name is Maria," Cole told Katherine. "Her mother, Elena, is grateful you have come. She says the burns are very bad and Maria is in terrible pain." Katherine dismounted and grabbed the supply bag. "Tell her I will do everything I can." Inside the small house, it took a moment for Katherine's eyes to adjust to the dimness. When they did, she saw a small figure lying on a bed in the corner, covered with a thin sheet. Even from the doorway, she could hear the child's labored breathing, the small whimpers of pain. She approached slowly, setting down her bag and sitting on the edge of the bed. The girl's face was flushed with fever, her eyes glassy. When Katherine gently pulled back the sheet, she had to bite her lip to keep from gasping. The burns covered most of the child's left arm and part of her chest, the skin angry red and blistered in places. "Maria," Katherine said softly. "My name is Katherine. I am going to help you feel better." The girl's eyes focused on her, and Katherine saw fear there and pain, but also a desperate kind of hope. She reached out and took the child's uninjured hand, holding it gently. "This is going to hurt a little bit," Katherine said, even though the child probably could not understand English. "But then it will feel better. I promise." She looked up at Cole, who had followed her inside and was translating for Alina. "Tell her I need to clean the burns first. We need cool water and clean cloths." For the next several hours, Katherine worked with a focus she had not known she possessed. She gently cleaned the burns, applied the honey that Mrs. Chen had said would help prevent infection, covered everything with the aloe, and wrapped the wounds in clean bandages. She made a tea from the willow bark to help with the pain and fever, coaxing the little girl to drink it even though it was bitter. Throughout it all, she talked to Maria in a soft, steady voice, telling her stories about Boston, about the ocean, about anything she could think of to distract the child from the pain. Cole stayed beside her, translating when necessary, helping to hold Maria still when Katherine needed to work on a particularly bad spot, offering quiet words of encouragement. By the time the sun was setting, Maria's fever had come down slightly, and she had fallen into an exhausted sleep. Alina wept with gratitude, trying to press money into Katherine's hands, but Katherine refused. "Tell her to use that money for medicine when the doctor comes," Katherine instructed Cole. "And tell her I will come back tomorrow to check on Maria and change the bandages." On the ride back to the ranch in the gathering darkness, Katherine felt shaky with exhaustion and relief. Cole rode close beside her, watching her carefully. "You were remarkable," he said. "I have never seen anything like it. You knew exactly what to do." "I was terrified the entire time." "That is what made it brave. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite the fear." He paused. "Katherine, I need to tell you something." She looked at him, her heart suddenly beating faster. "When I asked you to come to the ranch, it was partly because I needed help for Mrs. Chen. But it was also because I could not stop thinking about you. From the moment I saw you washing those bloody gloves, trying so hard to save something that everyone else would have just thrown away, I was fascinated. And these past weeks, getting to know you, watching you throw yourself into this life with such determination and grace, I've come to care for you a great deal." Katherine's breath caught in her throat. "Cole, you do not have to say anything. I know I am probably out of line. You work for me, and it is not appropriate for me to speak this way. But after today, after watching you tend to that child with such gentleness and skill, I realized that I could not keep silent any longer. You are not too soft for this life, Katherine. You are exactly what this life needs." "What I need." They had reached the ranch, and Cole dismounted, then came around to help Katherine down from her horse. When his hands closed around her waist, she felt the warmth of them through the fabric of her dress, and something in her chest loosened and expanded. "I care for you too," she said quietly. "I have been trying to convince myself it was inappropriate or foolish, but I cannot help it. When I am with you, I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Cole's hands tightened on her waist, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. But then he stepped back, maintaining propriety even though his eyes were dark with emotion. "Then we will court properly," he said. "I will do this right, Katherine. You deserve that." Over the next weeks, Cole courted Katherine with a patience and tenderness that made her fall more deeply in love with him every day. He took her riding in the early mornings, showing her the secret places on the ranch where the wildflowers grew thickest. He sat with her on the porch in the evenings, reading aloud from books of poetry while she mended clothes. He brought her small gifts, nothing expensive, but things he had clearly chosen with care. A smooth stone in an unusual color, a feather from a hawk, a jar of wild honey. He also came with her every time she rode to the Rodriguez homestead to check on Maria. The little girl was healing well, the burns slowly fading from angry red to pink. Alina insisted that Katherine and Cole stay for meals, and they sat at the humble table eating simple food and communicating in a mixture of Spanish, English, and gestures that somehow always made sense. Katherine continued her work at the ranch, but now there was a lightness to it, a joy that came from knowing she was building a life here, a real life with purpose and connection. Mrs. Chen watched the developing romance with obvious approval, often shooing Katherine out of the kitchen in the evenings so she could spend more time with Cole. "A man like that does not come along often," Mrs. Chen told her one day. "You would be a fool to let him slip away." "I have no intention of letting him slip away," Katherine assured her. But even as her happiness grew, she could not completely escape the criticisms of the outside world. On her occasional trips into Mineral Park for supplies, she endured Mrs. Pemberton's thin-lipped disapproval and the whispered comments of the other town ladies. They thought it scandalous that she was living at the ranch, working as a servant. They said she was ruining her reputation, throwing herself at Cole Vance, behaving in a way no proper woman should. Katherine tried not to let their words hurt her, but they did. She had been raised to care about propriety, about what people thought. Old habits were hard to break. One evening in late July, after a particularly unpleasant encounter with Mrs. Pemberton in the Mercantile, Katherine sat on the porch feeling low. Cole found her there, her eyes red from crying though she tried to hide it. "What happened?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Nothing. It is foolish." "It is not foolish if it made you cry. Tell me." So Katherine told him about Mrs. Pemberton's cutting remarks, about how the woman had said that Katherine was wasting her education and upbringing, that she was degrading herself with manual labor, that she was living in sin even if nothing improper was actually happening. Cole's jaw tightened. "That woman has no right to judge you. But what if she is right? What if I am throwing away everything I was raised to be?" "And what were you raised to be?" "A decoration in someone's parlor. A woman who knows how to pour tea and make polite conversation but never does anything of real substance." Cole took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle on hers. "Katherine, in the few months you have been here, you have saved a man from bleeding to death, helped heal a child from terrible burns, kept a household running smoothly, and brought light and warmth to a place that badly needed it. How is that wasting anything? Mrs. Pemberton says that gentleness and kindness are well and good for women in civilized society, but that out here they are liabilities. She says I will never survive if I do not toughen up. Then Mrs. Pemberton is a fool." Cole stood and pulled Katherine to her feet, keeping hold of her hands. "Listen to me. The world is full of tough people. People who think that the only way to survive is to become hard and closed off and suspicious. But that kind of toughness comes at a cost. It means cutting yourself off from connection, from compassion, from everything that makes life worth living. Your softness is not a liability. It is the most valuable thing about you. But I cry at everything. I cannot even kill a chicken without feeling sick. I flinch at loud noises and have nightmares about my brother's death. How is that strength? Because despite all of that, you keep showing up, you keep helping, you keep caring. Do you know how much courage that takes? To stay soft in a hard world, to keep your heart open when it would be so much easier to close it off. That is real strength, Katherine, the kind that matters." Katherine felt tears spilling down her cheeks again, but they were different now. Not tears of hurt, but of relief, of being truly seen and understood. "I love you," she said. The words came out before she could think about whether it was too soon, whether it was proper. "I love you, Cole." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I love you too, more than I thought I could love anyone. Marry me, Katherine, not because it is proper or because Mrs. Pemberton thinks we should or for any reason except that I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste kisses she had received from the few suitors she had entertained in Boston. This kiss was full of passion and promise, of desert sunsets and starlit skies, of a future being built together from dust and hope and love. They were married in September, when the worst of the summer heat had passed and the desert was beginning to green up from the monsoon rains. The ceremony was simple, held at the ranch with the preacher from Mineral Park officiating. Mrs. Chen cried happy tears and made enough food to feed an army. The ranch hands all put on their best clothes and stood up straighter than Katherine had ever seen them stand. The Rodriguez family came, with little Maria running to hug Katherine, her burns now healed to pale scars that would fade with time. Even some of the people from town came, though Mrs. Pemberton was notably absent, but Katherine found she did not care. The people who mattered were there, the people who had accepted her, supported her, loved her. She wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair that Cole had picked that morning. He wore a new suit, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in clothes more formal than his usual work attire. But his eyes, when he looked at her, were warm and full of love. "I, Cole Vance, take you, Katherine Foster, to be my wife," he said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to honor your softness as the strength it is, to protect your tender heart while never asking you to harden it, to build a life with you where gentleness and compassion are valued as much as toughness and grit." Katherine's voice shook as she spoke her own vows. "I, Katherine Foster, take you, Cole Vance, to be my husband. I promise to bring all of my softness to our life together, to never apologize for tears or tenderness, to show our children that true strength comes from keeping your heart open even when the world tells you to close it." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the assembled guests startled the horses in the nearby corral and sent a flock of birds wheeling into the sky. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than Katherine had seen in one place since leaving Boston. Cole was pulled away periodically by well-wishers, but he always found his way back to her, his hand finding hers, his eyes seeking her face in the crowd. When the party finally wound down and the last guest had departed, Cole took Katherine's hand and led her into the house, into the bedroom that they would now share. He had spent the past week fixing it up, painting the walls, building new furniture, making it beautiful for her. "Are you happy?" he asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I knew it was possible to be," she said honestly. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and gentle touches. Cole made love to her with patience and care, always attentive to her comfort, her pleasure. Afterward, lying in his arms with the night breeze drifting through the window, Katherine felt as though all the broken pieces of her life had finally come together into something whole and right. "I used to think I did not belong here," she murmured against his chest. "That I was too soft for this life. And now I think maybe this life was waiting for someone soft enough to gentle it." The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. The ranch demanded constant work, and there were times when Katherine fell into bed exhausted, barely able to keep her eyes open. There were droughts that threatened the cattle, disputes with neighboring ranchers, moments of fear when Cole or one of the hands was injured. But through it all, their love deepened and grew. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's needs. Cole learned that Katherine needed quiet time in the mornings to collect herself for the day. Katherine learned that Cole processed his worries by working with his hands, that he would go out to the barn and repair tack or mend fences when something was troubling him. They also learned to work together in ways that utilized both of their strengths. When a neighboring rancher tried to cheat Cole on a cattle sale, Catherine's education and quick mind helped her spot the discrepancies in the contract. When a cowboy was badly injured in a riding accident, Cole's steady strength combined with Catherine's gentle care to pull the man through. Mrs. Chen, her rheumatism growing worse, eventually retired from daily work at the ranch, though she still lived in a small cottage on the property and came by regularly to visit and offer advice. Katherine took over full management of the household, hiring 2 younger women from town to help with the heaviest work. The town's attitude toward Katherine gradually shifted. Her work with little Maria had not gone unnoticed, and when a fever swept through Mineral Park the following winter, it was Katherine that people called for. She went from house to house, nursing the sick, offering comfort to the dying, using the same gentle touch that had once been called a weakness. Even Mrs. Pemberton, when her own son fell ill, swallowed her pride and sent for Katherine. The woman never apologized for her earlier harshness, but the gratitude in her eyes when her boy recovered said more than words could have. In the spring of their 2nd year of marriage, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Cole one evening as they sat watching the sunset, and the joy on his face made her heart overflow. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He kissed her softly. "You are going to be the most wonderful mother." The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine suffered from terrible nausea in the early months, and the Arizona heat in the later months was almost unbearable. But Cole was patient and attentive, bringing her cool cloths when she was sick, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings, reading to her when she was too tired to do anything but rest. Mrs. Chen came out of retirement to help prepare for the baby, knitting tiny clothes and setting up the small bedroom next to theirs as a nursery. The ranch hands, these tough cowboys who broke horses and herded cattle, turned into gentle giants around Katherine, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was comfortable, if there was anything they could do. When her time came in early November, it was Mrs. Chen and Alina Rodriguez who attended her, along with the doctor from Mineral Park. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Katherine was sure she could not go on. But then she would hear Cole's voice from the other room, pacing and praying, and she would find the strength to keep pushing. Their son was born just as dawn was breaking, his first cry piercing the early morning quiet. When the doctor placed the squirming, red-faced infant in Katherine's arms, she understood for the first time what true love meant. "He is perfect," she whispered. Cole was allowed in then, and he approached the bed with wonder written all over his face. When he looked down at his son, tears streamed unashamedly down his weathered cheeks. "Thank you," he said to Katherine. "Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas after her brother, with the middle name James after Cole's father. Little Thomas Vance came into the world with a powerful set of lungs and an insatiable appetite, and he changed everything. Katherine had thought she knew what love was, had thought her feelings for Cole represented the fullest expression of human emotion. But the fierce, protective, all-consuming love she felt for her son was something else entirely. She understood now what Cole had meant about his mother's softness being her strength. Katherine would do anything, fight anyone, endure any hardship to protect this small, vulnerable person who depended on her completely. Cole was equally besotted. This tough, capable rancher who thought nothing of wrestling steers or breaking wild horses approached his infant son with the utmost gentleness. He would sit for hours holding the baby, talking to him in a soft voice, telling him about the ranch, about the land, about the legacy he would inherit. "You are so good with him," Katherine said one evening, watching Cole rock their son to sleep. "I am just following your example," Cole said, "loving with my whole heart and not being afraid to show it." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Cole's reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle spread, and buyers came from as far as California to purchase his stock. He hired more hands, expanded the grazing land, built new barns and corrals, but he never let the work consume him the way some ranchers did. He made time for his family, for Katherine and Thomas, for the quiet moments that gave life meaning. He taught Thomas to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, holding him in the saddle and leading the gentle mare around the corral. He read to him every night, the same books of poetry he had once read to Katherine. Katherine continued her work tending to the sick and injured in the area, developing a reputation as a skilled healer. She never charged for her services, but people brought gifts anyway: fresh eggs, vegetables from their gardens, handmade items. The pantry was always full, and Katherine often distributed the surplus to families who had less. 3 years after Thomas was born, Katherine gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Rose. The births were easier than Thomas's had been, perhaps because her body knew what to do this time, or perhaps because the twins were smaller and came into the world more eager to join the party already in progress. The ranch house, which had once seemed so spacious, suddenly felt cramped with 3 small children running around. Cole oversaw an expansion, adding on several new rooms and a larger kitchen. He also built Katherine a small room of her own, a quiet space where she could retreat when the chaos of family life became overwhelming. "Everyone needs a place to be soft," he told her when he showed her the finished room. "Even you." The years passed in a blur of activity and joy. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and the cattle as much as his father did. The twins were wild and adventurous, constantly getting into mischief and keeping Katherine on her toes. They had their father's love of the land and their mother's tender heart. More children followed, another son, Daniel, and then finally a daughter, Emily, who would be their last. The house was never quiet, never still, always full of laughter and tears and the beautiful chaos of a large, loving family. Cole and Katherine adapted to each stage of parenthood, learning as they went. They made mistakes, of course. There were times when tempers flared, when patience ran thin, when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. But they always came back to the foundation of their love, to the promise they had made to each other to remain soft even when it was hard. The children grew up seeing their parents' affection for each other, the gentle touches, the whispered endearments, the way Cole still brought Katherine wildflowers from the range, and she still left little notes in his saddlebag when he rode out. They learned that tenderness was not weakness, that tears were not shameful, that it was possible to be both strong and gentle. When Thomas was 16, old enough to take on real responsibility at the ranch, Cole began teaching him the business side of ranching. They spent long evenings going over the books, discussing breeding lines, planning for the future. But Cole also made sure his son understood that success was not just measured in dollars and cattle. "The most important thing I can teach you," Cole told Thomas one evening, "is that how you treat people matters more than how much money you make. Your mother taught me that. She came here with nothing but gentleness and compassion, and she built a life that touches everyone around her. That is real wealth." The twins, now 14 and growing into young women, followed their mother on her healing visits, learning her techniques, absorbing her philosophy of care. They had inherited her soft heart and her inability to see suffering without trying to help. More than once, Katherine found them nursing an injured bird or rabbit, tenderly caring for creatures that most people would have ignored. Young Daniel, at 10, was the family comedian, always ready with a joke or silly face to lighten the mood. And little Emily, just 7, was already showing signs of being an artist, constantly drawing pictures of the desert landscape she loved. Mrs. Chen had passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 years earlier, and they had buried her on a hillside overlooking the ranch. Katherine still visited the grave regularly, bringing flowers and talking to her old friend about the children, about the ranch, about how grateful she was for the older woman's guidance and acceptance. Elena Rodriguez and her family remained close friends. Maria, the little girl whose life Katherine had helped save, was now a beautiful young woman of 20, engaged to be married. She often told people that Katherine was her guardian angel, that she owed her life to the gentle Eastern woman who had not been afraid to help. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Cole surprised Katherine with a trip. They left the children in the capable hands of Joe, the foreman, and his wife, and traveled to California to see the ocean. It was the first time Katherine had seen the sea since leaving Boston, and standing on the beach with the waves crashing at her feet, she felt the last piece of her old life finally settle into place with her new one. "You ever miss it?" Cole asked, his arm around her waist. "Your old life in Boston," Katherine considered the question seriously. "I miss some things. The theaters, the bookstores, the ease of city life. But I would not trade what I have now for anything. That life was comfortable, but it was not real. I was going through the motions, teaching other people to go through the motions. Here, everything matters. Everything is real, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard." She turned to face him, her hands on his chest. "You gave me the freedom to be myself, Cole. All those years ago, when you said that softness was strength, you gave me permission to stop pretending to be something I was not. That gift is worth more than all the comfort and refinement in the world." He kissed her then, deeply and passionately, and she felt the same thrill she had felt 15 years ago when he first told her he loved her. Some things, she thought, never changed. Some loves only deepened with time. When they returned to the ranch, they found everything running smoothly. Thomas had handled a minor crisis with a broken fence without bothering them. The twins had organized a barn dance for the Hands and the neighboring families, raising money for a new school building in Mineral Park. Daniel had taught himself to play the harmonica and drove everyone crazy practicing. Emily had painted a picture of the family that was so charming Katherine immediately had it framed and hung in the parlor. Life continued its steady rhythm. The children grew older, more independent. Thomas, at 21, took over more and more of the daily operations of the ranch, freeing Cole to slow down a bit. The twins married within a year of each other, both to good men who worked on neighboring ranches. Daniel decided he wanted to be a veterinarian and left for school back east, though he promised to return. Emily continued her art, her paintings of the desert becoming quite sought after. Cole and Katherine, now in their early 40s, found themselves with a quieter house than they had known in years. At first, the silence was strange, almost uncomfortable. But gradually, they rediscovered the rhythms of their early marriage, the long conversations on the porch, the rides through the desert at sunrise, the simple pleasure of each other's company. They became grandparents when Sarah gave birth to a daughter, and then again when Rose had twin boys. Katherine held her grandchildren with the same tenderness she had held her own babies, marveling at the continuation of life, at the way love multiplied rather than divided. Thomas eventually married a schoolteacher from Prescott, a kind, intelligent woman named Margaret who fit into the family as though she had always been there. They gave Katherine and Cole 3 more grandchildren, and Thomas took over full ownership of the ranch, though Cole remained an active advisor. In their 50s, with their children grown and the ranch in capable hands, Cole and Katherine finally had time to travel. They visited Boston, where Katherine showed Cole the places of her childhood, the school where she had taught, the streets she had walked. They went to San Francisco, to Denver, to Santa Fe, but they always came back to the ranch, to the desert that had become their true home. On a warm evening in May, exactly 30 years after the day Katherine had first arrived in Mineral Park, she and Cole sat on their porch watching the sunset. Her hair was now streaked with gray, and his face was deeply lined from years in the sun. But his hand in hers felt the same as it always had, strong and calloused and infinitely gentle. "You remember the first time we sat here together?" Cole asked. "When you had just arrived at the ranch and you said you thought you could be happy here." "I remember. I was so nervous, so unsure of everything. And now," Katherine looked out at the land that had seemed so foreign and frightening when she first arrived. Now she knew every inch of it, every rock and cactus and hidden spring. She knew the way the light changed with the seasons, the smell of rain on the desert, the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. She knew the people who lived on this land, had delivered their babies and nursed their sick and celebrated their joys and mourned their losses. Most of all, she knew the man beside her, knew him in the way that only came from decades of shared life. She knew the way he took his coffee, the expression he made when he was worried, the songs he hummed when he thought no one was listening. She knew his scars and his dreams, his fears and his hopes. "Now I know that Mrs. Pemberton was wrong," Katherine said. "I was not too soft for frontier life. This life needed softness. It needed someone willing to cry at beauty, to grieve over loss, to celebrate small joys." Toughness built the ranches and towns, but it was softness that made them into homes. Cole raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "You have spent 30 years proving that love and gentleness can thrive anywhere, even in the hardest places. You have raised children who know how to be strong and kind. You have healed the sick and comforted the dying. You have made this desert bloom, not with plants but with compassion." "We did it together," Katherine corrected. "You were the one who first told me that softness was strength. You gave me permission to be myself when the whole world was telling me to be different. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." As the sun slipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear, Katherine thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the frightened young woman she had been, washing blood from white gloves and wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. She thought about Thomas, the brother she had come too late to save but whose memory had brought her to this place. She thought about Mrs. Chen, Elena, little Maria, all the people who had helped shape her life. But mostly she thought about Cole, about the cowboy who had seen something valuable in what everyone else called weakness. He had taught her that there were many kinds of strength, that the willingness to remain tender in a hard world was perhaps the most powerful force of all. Their children came to visit often, bringing the grandchildren who filled the house with noise and laughter. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management, expanding and modernizing while still maintaining the values that Cole and Katherine had instilled. The family name became synonymous with quality cattle and fair dealing, but also with generosity and community service. Katherine continued her healing work well into her 60s, finally retiring only when her own health began to fail. The community threw her a celebration, and person after person stood up to talk about how she had touched their lives. There were people she had delivered, people she had nursed through illness, people she had simply comforted in times of grief. The line between patient and friend had long since blurred, and Katherine realized that she had done exactly what she had hoped to do when she first came west. She had made a difference. Cole remained active on the ranch until his 70s, unable to completely let go of the work he loved. But he made time for the things that mattered most: his wife, his children and grandchildren, the quiet moments of beauty that made life worth living. He kept bringing Katherine wildflowers until the very end, laying them on her pillow when she became too weak to walk outside and see them growing. On a spring morning, with her family gathered around her bed and Cole's hand clasped in hers, Katherine Foster Vance passed away peacefully at the age of 78. She died as she had lived, surrounded by love, her face soft and unlined despite her years, as though she had never learned to harden herself against the world. Cole followed her 6 months later, unable or unwilling to live without the woman who had been his partner for more than 50 years. Thomas found him in his favorite chair on the porch, facing the sunset, a peaceful expression on his face and one of Katherine's old letters clutched in his hand. They were buried side by side on the hillside next to Mrs. Chen, overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone read, "Cole and Katherine Vance. They proved that love and gentleness could tame the wildest frontier." Years later, when the children were old and telling stories to their own grandchildren, they would speak of their parents with reverence and love. They would talk about how their mother had come from the East, soft and gentle, and completely unprepared for frontier life. They would tell about how everyone said she was too soft, that she would never survive. And then they would smile and say, "But your great-grandfather, Cole Vance, he knew better. He said that softness is strength, and he spent the rest of his life proving it." The ranch still stood, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of love and gentleness in a hard world. The desert had not broken Katherine Foster. Instead, she had gentled it, had shown that there was more than one way to be strong, more than one way to build a life. In the end, she had not just survived the frontier. She had transformed it, one tender touch, one act of compassion, one moment of softness at a time. And the land, which had seemed so harsh and unforgiving when she first arrived, had bloomed under her care, becoming not just a place to survive, but a place to truly live.